The rain fell in silver sheets the night Lyra Jenkins climbed the steps of a building that should not exist. She had found it by accident, or perhaps desperation had sharp enough edges to cut through the veil between worlds. The address had been scrawled on a card pressed into her palm by a stranger 3 nights ago, when she'd been sleeping in a doorway with everything she owned in a backpack that smelled of mildew and lost chances. The stranger had been pale as moonlight, and his eyes had held a weight that made her think of centuries rather than years. "When you have nowhere else," he had said, "go here." Now she stood before iron doors set into stone that gleamed like obsidian, rain plastering her dark hair to her skull, her jeans soaked through, her jacket doing nothing against the cold that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The building rose above her, Gothic and impossible, wedged between 2 modern apartment blocks as though it had always been there, and the city had simply built around it. She should turn back. She should find a shelter, a church, anywhere normal. But normal had burned down 3 weeks ago when the fire took her apartment and the medical bills took everything else. Normal had walked away when her last friend said she couldn't keep sleeping on the couch, that she needed to figure her life out. Normal had died with her mother 2 years ago, leaving Lyra with nothing but debt and the particular loneliness of being 23 and completely untethered from the world. So she pushed the door open. The entrance hall stretched before her like something out of a fever dream, all black marble and soaring ceilings, lit by chandeliers that burned with flames too white to be natural. Figures moved in the shadows, and when one passed close enough for her to see clearly, Lyra's breath caught. The woman was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly. White hair fell past her shoulders in a waterfall of silk, her skin so pale it seemed to glow faintly in the strange light. She wore a gown that belonged in a museum, midnight blue velvet that swept the floor, and when her eyes flickered toward Lyra, they were the color of old blood, vampire. The word rose in Lyra's mind with absolute certainty, though she had never believed in such things before this moment. But belief seemed irrelevant when confronted with the evidence of impossible grace, the predatory stillness, the sense that she was looking at something that had forgotten what it meant to be prey. "You are bleeding rain on the marble," the woman said, her voice carrying an accent Lyra couldn't place. "State your business or leave." Lyra's voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. "Someone gave me this address, said to come here when I had nowhere else." "That is not business. That is misfortune." The woman turned away. "We do not run a charity." "Please." The word escaped before Lyra could stop it, and she hated the sound of her own desperation. But she had climbed those steps because some part of her recognized that this was the last door. If it closed, there would be nothing beyond it but the slow slide into oblivion. I don't know what I need, but I have nowhere left to belong." The words rang out across the entrance hall, and the effect was immediate. Every figure in the shadows went still. The sudden silence pressed against Lyra's ears like a physical weight. Then a door opened at the far end of the hall, and a man stepped through. No, not a man. Something that wore the shape of one. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black that seemed to drink the light. White hair fell to his shoulders, and his face was all sharp edges and aristocratic lines, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. But it was his eyes that stopped Lyra's breath, deepest crimson, ancient beyond measure, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being read in a language she didn't understand. He crossed the hall with liquid grace, and the other vampires drew back, creating a path. When he stopped before her, Lyra had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Say that again," he commanded, his voice deep and rolling like distant thunder. What you just said. Repeat it." Lyra swallowed against the sudden dryness in her throat. Something in his expression made her think of a blade being slowly unsheathed. "I have nowhere left to belong." He studied her for a long moment, and Lyra felt weighed, measured, seen down to the marrow of her bones. She should be terrified. Every instinct screamed that she was standing before something that could end her life without effort, but beneath the fear ran a thread of something else, a strange recognition, as though some part of her had been waiting to meet those crimson eyes. "Then belong to me." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Lyra heard the woman who had first addressed her make a small, sharp sound of shock. Murmurs rippled through the gathered vampires. "I don't understand," Lyra said. The vampire king, because that was what he had to be, she understood that now with the same bone-deep certainty that had named him vampire, tilted his head slightly. "It is quite simple. You require a place. I have offered one. Do you accept?" "I don't even know your name." "Dorian Morrígan, King of the Northern Court." He said it as though the title was simply fact, without pride or pretense. "And you are?" "Lyra Jenkins." Her own name sounded small and human and desperately ordinary in comparison. Lyra. He tested the name, his accent turning it into something almost lyrical. "Do you accept my offer?" She should ask questions. She should understand what she was agreeing to. But standing there soaked and shaking in a hall full of creatures that should not exist, Lyra found she had run out of caution along with everything else. "Yes." Dorian inclined his head, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both acknowledgement and dismissal of the weight of the moment. "Witnessed and bound," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Lyra Jenkins is under my protection and belongs to House Morrígan. Let any who would dispute this speak now." No one spoke. "Come." Dorian turned, clearly expecting her to follow. Lyra's legs moved before her brain fully engaged, carrying her after the vampire king through the door he had emerged from and into a corridor lit by more of those two white flames. Her wet shoes squeaked against the floor, a jarring note of mundane reality against the otherworldly surroundings. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that made Lyra stop in her tracks. It was a throne room. There was no other word for it. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadows that even the chandeliers couldn't penetrate. Columns of dark stone marched down either side, and at the far end stood a throne of black wood and silver, intricate carvings depicting scenes Lyra couldn't quite make out from this distance. Dorian continued walking, and Lyra hurried to catch up. He didn't sit on the throne. Instead, he moved to a side door, leading her into a smaller chamber that felt almost intimate in comparison. A fire burned in an enormous hearth, and though the flames were the normal orange gold of regular fire, they seemed wrong somehow, too perfect, too controlled. "You are soaked through," Dorian observed, moving to pull a cord near the wall. "That will be remedied." "I'm fine," Lyra said automatically, though she was shivering now in earnest, her body finally registering the cold. "You are not fine. You are hypothermic and exhausted." He turned those crimson eyes on her again. "Do not lie to a vampire, Lyra Jenkins. We can hear the rhythm of your heart, smell the chemicals in your blood. Your body betrays your words." Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks. "That seems like an unfair advantage." "Most things about vampires are unfair advantages. That is rather the point of being apex predators." His lips quirked slightly, not quite a smile. "Sit. Someone will be here momentarily." "Who?" "Someone who will ensure you do not freeze to death in my court. It would be poor form to offer you belonging and then let you die within the hour." Lyra lowered herself into one of the high-backed chairs near the fire, and the warmth immediately began seeping into her bones. She watched as Dorian moved to a cabinet and withdrew a crystal decanter filled with deep red liquid. He poured a measure into a glass, with the casual grace of someone performing a ritual so familiar it required no thought. "Is that blood?" "Yes." He took a sip, and Lyra tried not to think about where it had come from. "We do not typically drink in front of humans. It makes them uncomfortable, but you will need to become accustomed to it if you are to live here." "Live here." Lyra repeated the words, testing them. "What exactly did I agree to?" "Belonging to House Morrígan means you are under my protection and authority. You will live within these walls, contribute to the functioning of the court in whatever capacity suits your skills, and in return you will be fed, housed, and defended against any threat." Dorian settled into the chair across from her, with the fluid grace of water finding its level. "It is not slavery. You may leave whenever you wish, though doing so will remove you from my protection." "And you just offered this to me? A complete stranger?" "Yes." "Why?" Dorian was quiet for a long moment, studying the blood in his glass as though it might contain answers. "I am not entirely certain," he admitted finally, and something in his tone suggested the admission cost him. "You stood in my hall, soaked and clearly desperate, and said you had nowhere to belong, and I found I could not ignore that." There was something in his voice, a note of old pain, carefully controlled. Lyra filed it away, a clue to the mystery of why a vampire king would take in a homeless human on a whim. A knock at the door interrupted them, and at Dorian's command, a woman entered. She was human, Lyra realized with a jolt of relief, though she wore her service to the court like armor, spine straight and eyes sharp. "This is Helena," Dorian said. "She manages the human staff and will see you settled. Helena, this is Lyra Jenkins. She has accepted belonging to House Morrígan." Helena's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of surprise she permitted herself. "Of course, my lord. Miss Jenkins, if you will come with me." Lyra stood, suddenly reluctant to leave the circle of firelight in Dorian's presence, which was insane considering she had met him perhaps 10 minutes ago, and he was a vampire king who could probably kill her without mussing his hair. "Thank you," she said, the words awkward but necessary. Dorian inclined his head. "We will speak more tomorrow. Rest tonight." Helena led her through a maze of corridors, up a flight of stairs, and finally to a room that made Lyra's breath catch. It was easily twice the size of her old apartment, with a 4-poster bed draped in deep green velvet, a wardrobe that looked like it belonged in a palace, and windows that overlooked a courtyard garden where impossible night-blooming flowers gleamed in the darkness. "The bathroom is through there," Helena said, pointing to a door on the left. "I will have clothes brought up. What size are you?" Lyra told her, feeling dreamlike and unmoored. Helena made notes on a small tablet that seemed jarringly modern against the Gothic surroundings. "Meals are served in the human quarters at 7, noon, and 6, Helena continued, "though if you will be keeping vampire hours, adjustments can be made. Do you have any dietary restrictions?" No, but I don't understand. What do you do here? The other humans?" Helena's expression softened slightly. "We serve the court in various capacities. I manage household affairs. Others work in the kitchens, the library, the gardens, security, research. The court has existed for over 1,000 years, Miss Jenkins. It requires considerable support to function. In return, we are well compensated, protected, and for those who wish it, given the choice to be turned when our time comes." "You want to become a vampire?" "Not all of us, but some do." Helena moved toward the door. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be overwhelming enough. If you need anything, pull the cord by the bed. Someone will come." Then she was gone, and Lyra was alone in a room fit for royalty, in a castle full of vampires, having somehow agreed to belong to a king whose eyes held centuries of secrets. She peeled off her wet clothes and stood under a shower that had water pressure like a gift from heaven, using soaps that smelled of bergamot and cedar. When she emerged, she found soft pajamas laid out on the bed and her backpack sitting on a chair, looking pitiful and small against the room's grandeur. Lyra climbed into the bed, and the mattress felt like sleeping on a cloud. She should be terrified. She should be planning her escape. Instead, for the first time in weeks, she felt almost safe. She fell asleep before she could examine that feeling too closely. Lyra woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and lay for a long moment trying to remember where she was. Then it came rushing back, the impossible building, the vampire king, the offer of belonging. She sat up and found more clothes laid out, this time jeans that looked like they would actually fit and a soft sweater the color of charcoal. She dressed quickly and was considering whether to pull the cord Helena had mentioned when a knock sounded at the door. Helena entered carrying a tray laden with breakfast that made Lyra's stomach growl audibly. "Good, you are awake. Eat, then I will show you the court properly." The food was simple, but perfect: scrambled eggs, toast with real butter, fresh fruit, coffee that tasted like someone had taken the concept of coffee and elevated it to an art form. Lyra ate ravenously while Helena waited with patient efficiency. The tour took over an hour. The court was vast, a labyrinth of halls and chambers that seemed to exist in a pocket of space larger than the building's exterior suggested. Helena showed her the library, 3 floors of books in a dozen languages. The kitchens, where human staff prepared meals for the living and other substances Lyra tried not to think about for the dead. The gardens enclosed by spelled glass that let in starlight but not sunlight. The training rooms where vampires practiced combat with weapons that looked medieval and terrifying. The king does not often take personal interest in new additions to the court, Helena said as they climbed yet another staircase. You have caused quite a stir. That was not my intention. Nevertheless, there are those who will seek to understand why Dorian Morrígan would offer belonging so freely. Be careful what you say, and to whom. It was a warning, kindly meant. Lyra filed it away next to her growing list of things she did not understand about her new situation. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a vampire. He was younger looking than Dorian, though age was clearly meaningless with vampires. Blonde hair instead of white, and eyes like chips of amber. "Well?" he said, looking Lyra up and down with unnerving thoroughness. "So this is the human who captured our king's attention." "Lord Caspian?" Helena said, her tone carefully neutral. "May I present Lyra Jenkins, Miss Jenkins, Lord Caspian Thorne, second of the Northern Court." Lyra had no idea what the protocol was for greeting vampire nobility, so she settled for a nod. "Hello." Caspian's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Charming. Tell me, Miss Jenkins, what exactly did you do to convince Dorian to extend his protection? It is not a gift he gives lightly." "I asked for help. Many ask. Few receive. Then I suppose I was fortunate. Or cunning." Caspian took a step closer, and Lyra forced herself not to back away. "Be warned, little human. Belonging to House Morrígan makes you a piece on the board. There are those who will seek to use you to reach the king. Is that a threat?" "A courtesy. I am loyal to Dorian. Not everyone in this court can say the same." Caspian stepped back, inclining his head in a gesture that might have been mockery or respect. "Helena, do ensure our newest addition understands the rules of the game she has entered." He swept past them, leaving a cold wake. "Do not mind Lord Caspian," Helena said. "He is protective of the king and suspicious by nature. It makes him good at his job. Which is keeping Dorian alive." The casual acknowledgement that even a vampire king could be killed sent a chill down Lyra's spine. They completed the tour in the human quarters, a section of the court where those with beating hearts lived and worked. It was more modern here, though still luxurious beyond anything Lyra had experienced. Helena introduced her to half a dozen people, whose names immediately tangled in Lyra's overwhelmed brain. "You will learn," Helena assured her. "It took me a month before I could navigate without getting lost. Now then, the king has requested you join him this evening in his private study. I will collect you at 8. What does he want?" "I imagine he wants to speak with you. You are, after all, a mystery he has chosen to keep." Helena's expression was unreadable. "Until then, you are free to explore or rest as you wish. I would recommend the library if you want to understand the world you have entered." Lyra took the advice. The library was blessedly empty of vampires, and she spent the afternoon pulling books at random, trying to construct a framework for understanding. Vampire society was apparently complex, bound by laws and hierarchies that made feudal Europe look straightforward. There were courts scattered across the world, each ruled by a king or queen, each with their own territories and traditions. The Northern Court was one of the oldest and most powerful, and Dorian Morrígan had ruled it for 300 years. 300 years. The number made Lyra's head spin. She found references to belonging, too. It was a legal status, apparently, binding a human to a vampire house under formal protection. It could be offered as payment for debts, as sanctuary, or as reward for service. Once witnessed, it was binding unless formally revoked by the vampire who had granted it. What it was not, she noted, was offered lightly. Most vampires kept perhaps 1 or 2 humans under their direct protection, usually those they had known for years. The idea of a king offering belonging to a stranger was, according to every text she could find, unprecedented. No pressure then. Helena collected her at 8 precisely, leading her back through the now familiar corridors to a part of the court Lyra had not yet seen. The private wing, Helena explained, where Dorian's personal chambers lay. The study was smaller than Lyra expected, though still grand by normal standards. Books lined the walls, and a desk of dark wood sat near windows that overlooked the impossible city skyline. Dorian stood by those windows, his white hair catching the light of the lamps, his profile sharp as a blade. "Miss Jenkins, my lord," Helena announced, then withdrew, closing the door behind her. Dorian turned, and those crimson eyes fixed on Lyra with the same unsettling intensity as the night before. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks." "Good." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. We need to discuss your situation properly." Lyra sat, and Dorian took the chair across from her rather than retreating behind the imposing desk. It struck her as a deliberate choice, removing the physical symbol of power between them. "You spent the day in the library," he observed. "Helena suggested it would help me understand. I have questions. I would be concerned if you did not. Ask." "Why me?" The question burst out before Lyra could phrase it more diplomatically. "You could have ignored me, told me to leave. Instead, you offered belonging, which apparently is a very big deal. Why?" Dorian was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "When you stood in my entrance hall and said you had nowhere to belong, I understood that feeling with a clarity that surprised me. I have lived for over 3 centuries. I have power, wealth, a court that answers to my every command. And yet there are times when I feel profoundly untethered, as though for all of this, I do not truly belong anywhere either." The confession was so unexpected, so raw, that Lyra forgot to breathe for a moment. "Vampires are inherently solitary creatures," Dorian continued. "We form alliances, build courts, play at civilization. But we are not pack animals. We do not truly connect, not in the way humans do. We exist and we endure, and after a few centuries, it all begins to feel hollow." So when you spoke those words, something in them resonated. And I thought perhaps if I could offer you belonging, it might teach me to understand it myself. "That is incredibly sad," Lyra said quietly. "It is the truth of immortality." Dorian met her eyes. "But to answer your question more directly, I offered because I wanted to. There need be no more reason than that. I am king. My will is law within these walls. The books say belonging makes me a member of your house, under your authority. Yes, I do not want to be anyone's possession." Something flickered in Dorian's expression. "Is that what you think this is? Is it not? You said it yourself, your will is law. I belong to you. That sounds an awful lot like ownership." "Belonging is not the same as being owned," Dorian said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. "You have freedom within these walls. I am not your master. But you could be, if you decided to be." Lyra leaned forward. "What happens if I want to leave? What happens if I disagree with you? What happens if I do not want to belong anymore?" "Then you leave. I told you that already." "Without consequences?" Dorian's jaw tightened. "There would be consequences in that you would no longer have my protection. The world is dangerous for humans alone. So I am trapped by circumstance rather than force. That is still a cage. It is survival." Dorian's voice had gone cold. "You came to my court with nothing. I have given you shelter, safety, a place. If you find that too confining, then by all means leave. I will not stop you." They glared at each other across the space between the chairs, and Lyra felt her temper flare, hot and bright. "I am grateful for what you have given me, but I will not pretend that belonging means the same thing to both of us. You see it as generosity. I see it as a reminder that I have no power here. You have more power than you realize." Dorian stood abruptly, moving to the window. "You have had my full attention since the moment you arrived. You have a room in the residential wing, not the servants' quarters. You have access to the library, the gardens, every part of this court. I have granted you privileges that others have spent years earning. Because you decided to, on a whim, which means you could decide to take them away just as easily. Dorian spun to face her, and for the first time Lyra saw genuine anger in his expression, controlled but burning beneath the surface. Do you believe I would harm you? I believe I do not know you well enough to believe anything. The anger faded as quickly as it had flared, replaced by something that looked almost like hurt. You are right. You do not know me. Perhaps this was a mistake. Lyra stood as well, her heart pounding. I did not say that. Then what are you saying? I am saying that if I am to belong here, it cannot be as a thing you own or a pet you keep. It has to be... She searched for words. It has to be mutual. Belonging goes both ways. Otherwise, it is just a pretty word for captivity. Dorian stared at her, and Lyra watched something shift in his expression, a door opening to rooms he kept locked even from himself. I do not know how to do that. I have been king for 3 centuries. I command. Others obey. That is the nature of what I am. Then maybe we both need to learn. Lyra took a breath, steadying herself. I am not ungrateful. I am not trying to be difficult, but I will not surrender who I am just to have a roof over my head. I cannot. I would not want you to. Then help me understand what you want from this, from me. Dorian moved back to his chair, sinking into it with a weariness that seemed at odds with his immortal nature. I want connection, something real. I am surrounded by vampires who fear me, respect me, obey me. But they do not truly see me, and humans in the court serve, but they know what I am, and that knowledge creates distance. You are the first person in longer than I can remember who has looked at me and seen someone worth arguing with. So you want me to yell at you? A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Perhaps, or simply to be honest, to not treat me like a monster or a king, but like someone, something. Lyra sat back down, the anger draining out of her, leaving only a strange sort of understanding. That is terribly lonely. Yes. I am still not comfortable with the word belong. Then we will find a better word, or we will redefine it until it means something we can both accept. Dorian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I am ancient and set in my ways, Lyra Jenkins, but I am not immovable. If this is to work as you said, it must be mutual. Teach me what that means. It was not a resolution, but it was a beginning. Lyra felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. I can try, but you have to actually listen. I am listening now. Yes. Lyra found herself almost smiling. Yes, you are. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from the weight of belonging to smaller, simpler things. Lyra told him about her life before, the slow accumulation of disasters that had left her on his doorstep. The mother who had died of cancer, the medical bills that devoured everything, the fire that took what little remained. Dorian listened with an intensity that made her feel like every word mattered, and when she finished, he said simply, You have survived a great deal. I did not have much choice. There is always a choice. You could have surrendered. You did not. That speaks to strength. Or stubbornness. Often the same thing. Lyra found herself relaxing in increments, the guard she had not realized she was holding easing. Dorian was easier to talk to than she expected, his ancient formality leavened by dry humor and a surprising willingness to let her see beyond the mask of kingship. When she finally returned to her room well past midnight, she felt wrung out, but lighter somehow, as though some burden she had been carrying had been shared. The next few days fell into a pattern. Mornings Lyra spent exploring the court, getting to know the human staff and learning the rhythms of the place. Afternoons in the library, devouring everything she could find about vampire society, history, politics. Evenings with Dorian in his study, talking. They argued frequently about the nature of authority, about the ethics of immortality, about whether vampires had souls and what it meant to be human. Lyra pushed back on his assumptions with a fierceness that seemed to both frustrate and delight him, and Dorian defended his positions with the confidence of someone who had spent centuries being right. but he also listened. When Lyra pointed out that his court ran on the unpaid labor of humans who had little choice but to serve, he frowned and spent a day reviewing contracts and compensation. When she challenged his assumption that age granted wisdom, he admitted that immortality often simply meant making the same mistakes for longer. When she asked why the court kept itself hidden from the human world, he explained the massacres that had occurred when vampires and humans last openly coexisted, his voice heavy with old grief. She was learning him, and he was learning her, and something was growing between them that neither quite knew how to name. The court noticed. Lyra caught whispers when she walked the halls, saw the way vampires watched her with calculation in their ancient eyes. Caspian pulled her aside one afternoon as she was heading to the library. "A word, Miss Jenkins." Lyra stopped, wary. "All right. The king is changing." Caspian's amber eyes were serious. In small ways, he smiles more. He questions decisions he once would have made without thought. He is softer. Is that a bad thing? For a king? It can be. There are those within the court who see any weakness as an opportunity. Caspian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Dorian has enemies, Lyra. Vampires who believe he has ruled too long, who covet his power. They will see his attachment to you as a vulnerability to exploit." "Attachment?" Lyra's pulse quickened. "We just talk. You are human. You do not see what we see. The way he looks at you, the way he has rearranged his entire evening schedule to ensure time with you, the way he speaks of you when you are not present." Caspian's expression was grave. "Dorian is falling for you, whether he has admitted it to himself or not. And that makes you a target. I did not ask for any of this. Irrelevant. You are here. You matter to him. Therefore, you are now a piece in a very dangerous game." Caspian pulled back. "I am telling you this not to frighten you, but to prepare you. Stay close to the court. Do not venture out alone. And if anyone approaches you with offers or questions about the king, come to me immediately." He left before Lyra could respond, and she stood in the corridor feeling the walls close in slightly. She had been so focused on understanding Dorian, on navigating her place in the court, that she had not considered how others might view her presence. That evening, when she met Dorian in his study, she told him about the conversation with Caspian. Dorian's expression went carefully blank. Caspian oversteps. "Does he? Is he wrong? About the danger? No. There are always those who would see me removed. It is the nature of power." Dorian moved to pour himself a drink, his movements precise. "About the rest I cannot say. Cannot or will not. Perhaps both." He turned to face her, and the crimson of his eyes seemed to burn brighter. "What do you want me to say, Lyra? That I find your company pleasant? I do. That I look forward to our evenings together? I do. That I think of you when you are not here? I do that as well. Dorian. But I am a vampire and a king, and you are human and mortal, and there is no universe in which those facts do not matter." He set the glass down untouched. "I offered you belonging because something in your words reached a part of me I thought long dead. But I am not fool enough to believe that can grow into anything beyond this, whatever this is. And what if I wanted it to?" The words escaped before Lyra could stop them, and she felt heat flood her face. Dorian went very still. "You do not know what you are saying. I am not a child. Do not patronize me." "I am not patronizing you. I am trying to protect you from a future that cannot exist." Dorian's voice had gone rough. "I am 347 years old. I have outlived everyone I ever cared for in my mortal life. I will outlive everyone I know now, unless they choose to become what I am. That is the curse of immortality, Lyra. Everyone you love dies, or you watch them transform into something else. There is no happy ending. There could be if I chose to turn. No." The word cracked like a whip. "I will not be responsible for taking your mortality from you. The price of becoming vampire is too high." "Should that not be my choice? Not when you do not understand what you would be giving up." Dorian moved toward her, and Lyra saw something raw in his expression, pain carefully controlled. You would lose the sun, Lyra. Daylight, warmth, the simple pleasure of feeling heat on your skin. You would lose your ability to create life. Vampires cannot have children. You would lose your humanity, slowly, piece by piece, as the years stretched into decades and the decades into centuries. You would become what I am, a beautiful, terrible thing that exists but does not truly live. You live. I see you live. I endure. It is not the same. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that Lyra could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the only hint of the age he carried. I will not be the reason you make that choice. I cannot. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. So what then? We just pretend there is nothing here? We go back to careful distance and formality? I do not know. Dorian's hand lifted as though to touch her face, then fell back to his side. I have no answer that does not end in pain. Then maybe we live with the pain. Maybe we take whatever time we have and stop worrying about the ending. You ask for things I do not know how to give. I am asking you to try. They stood in the space between touch and separation, and Lyra could see the war in Dorian's expression, centuries of control fighting against something newer and far more dangerous. Finally, he stepped back. I need to think. This conversation. I need time. It felt like a door closing, but Lyra forced herself to nod. All right. She left the study with her heart pounding and tears she would not let fall burning behind her eyes. In her room, she sat on the edge of the too large bed and let herself acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling for him, for a vampire king who looked at her like she was something precious and spoke to her like she was an equal, for someone who was lonely in a way that echoed her own isolation, for someone who could never give her anything beyond these stolen evenings and the constant awareness of time running out. It was possibly the stupidest thing she had ever done, and she had made some truly stupid choices in her life. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Helena, her expression tight with concern. You need to come with me, now. What is wrong? There is a challenge. Helena was already moving, and Lyra hurried to follow. Another vampire has invoked the right of contest. They are challenging the king's decision to grant you belonging. What does that mean? It means if Dorian does not defend his choice, you will be removed from the court's protection and cast out. And if he does defend it, Helena's voice dropped, then he will have to prove his right to you through combat. They reached the throne room to find it packed with vampires, a sea of white hair and pale skin and eyes that glowed with predatory interest. Dorian stood before his throne, and facing him was a vampire Lyra did not recognize, tall and cruel-looking, with a smile that made her skin crawl. Lyra Jenkins. The strange vampire's voice carried across the room. Come forward. Do not. Dorian's command stopped Lyra in her tracks. She is under my protection. You will not address her directly. Your protection is exactly what I question, my king. The vampire gave the title a mocking edge. You offered belonging to a human stranger without cause, without history, without even the excuse of blood debt. This is unprecedented and irregular. I invoke the right of contest to question your judgment. Your name and house, Dorian said, his voice cold as winter. Nikolai Thorne, cousin to your second, Lord of the Eastern Territories. Nikolai spread his hands. I mean no disrespect, merely to uphold the traditions of our kind. Belonging is a sacred bond. It should not be offered capriciously. I do not act capriciously. Then explain. What did this human do to earn such favor? What service has she provided? What value does she bring to House Morrígan? Nikolai's smile sharpened. Or is the truth that she has caught your eye in other ways, and you are using your position to keep her as a pet? The last word dripped with disdain, and Lyra felt fury rise hot in her chest. But before she could speak, Dorian moved. He did not run. He simply was in one place and then another, the space between negated by speed Lyra's eyes could not track. His hand closed around Nikolai's throat, lifting the other vampire off his feet. Choose your next words very carefully, Dorian said, his voice a purr of promised violence. I have ended vampires for less offensive implications. Nikolai managed a choked laugh. The right of contest protects me from summary execution. You know the law, my king. Answer the challenge or forfeit your claim. Dorian held him for a moment longer, then released him. Nikolai dropped to his feet, rubbing his throat, smile never wavering. I offered belonging to Lyra Jenkins because she needed it, and I chose to provide it, Dorian said, addressing the room now. My reasons are my own. My judgment is law within this court. If you wish to contest that, Nikolai Thorne, then we will settle this in the manner of our kind. Trial by combat. Tomorrow night when the moon is full. A ripple of excitement ran through the gathered vampires. Nikolai's smile widened. I accept. The terms? Standard. First blood for a minor challenge, submission or death for a true contest. Which do you prefer? Death. Nikolai said it casually, as though discussing the weather. I would not insult you with anything less, my king. So be it. Dorian turned away, dismissing him. This court is adjourned. The vampires began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Lyra caught Caspian's eye across the room, saw him shake his head in a gesture that might have been warning or resignation. Helena guided Lyra out before anyone else could approach her, taking her back to her room with quick efficiency. Stay here tonight. Do not open the door for anyone except me or the king. Is Dorian going to be all right? The king is the most powerful vampire in the northern court. Nikolai is a fool for challenging him. But Helena's expression suggested she was not entirely confident. Try to rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. Rest proved impossible. Lyra paced her room, mind churning. This was her fault. If she had not accepted belonging, if she had just walked away that first night, Dorian would not be facing combat because of her. Near midnight, another knock. Lyra ignored Helena's advice and opened the door. Dorian stood in the corridor, and Lyra had never seen him look so tired. May I come in? She stepped aside, and he entered, moving to stand by the windows. I am sorry you witnessed that. Do not apologize, this is my fault. It is not. Nikolai has been looking for an excuse to challenge me for a decade. You are merely the pretext he has chosen. Dorian turned to face her. He is not wrong, though. I did offer you belonging without precedent. The court has a right to question it. So explain it to them. Tell them why. I cannot, because the truth would make things worse. Dorian crossed the room to stand before her. The truth is that I offered you belonging, because something in you called to something in me. Because when you stood in my hall, desperate and defiant, I wanted to keep you safe with an intensity that shocked me. Because in the weeks since you arrived, you have become the best part of my endless days. Because I am falling for you, Lyra Jenkins, and I am terrified of what that means. Lyra's breath caught. Dorian. But I cannot tell the court that, because vampires do not fall in love. We lust, we possess, we obsess. But love, that is a mortal thing, and admitting to it would make me appear weak. And a weak king is a dead king. You are not weak. I feel weak when I am with you, like all my centuries of control are built on sand. He reached out finally and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers cold against her skin. I should not have spoken to you the way I did earlier. I should not have pushed you away. But I am afraid, Lyra. I am afraid of hurting you, of losing you, of turning you into something you would come to hate. I am afraid that there is no version of this that ends well. I am afraid too, Lyra admitted, but I am more afraid of not trying. Dorian cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. If I lose tomorrow, you will be cast out. Nikolai will ensure you leave with nothing. Then do not lose. If I win, the court will know that you matter to me. That will paint a target on your back that will never fade. I can handle it. You should not have to. But he was leaning closer now, and Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. This is madness. Probably. I am a monster. You are a person. I could kill you without effort. You would never hurt me. How can you be so certain? Because I see you, Dorian, not the king, not the vampire, you, and you are not a monster. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like Lyra had imagined a vampire's kiss might be. It was soft, tentative, full of centuries of loneliness finally finding an answer. His lips were cool against hers, but they warmed as the kiss deepened, and when Lyra's hands came up to grip his shoulders, she felt him shudder. They broke apart slowly, and Dorian rested his forehead against hers. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that this has been real. You have been real. The first real thing in longer than I can remember. You are going to win tomorrow. If I do not, you will. Lyra pulled back to look him in the eyes. Because we are not done yet. We have not figured out what belonging means when it goes both ways. We have not argued about another dozen philosophical problems. We have not decided what we are to each other. So you are going to win because we have too much left to do. Dorian's smile was small but genuine. Your faith in me is humbling. My faith in you is earned. Lyra kissed him again, quick and fierce. Now go prepare or rest or whatever it is vampire kings do before combat. And tomorrow, you are going to destroy Nikolai Thorne and send a message to anyone else who thinks they can question your judgment. Yes, my lady. The title was gentle mockery and genuine affection in equal measure. He left, and Lyra stood in the center of her room feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. She was in love with a vampire king, and tomorrow he was going to fight to the death to defend his right to keep her. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first chapter of something that might, against all odds, be worth the risk. The combat took place in a courtyard Lyra had not seen before, open to the night sky, ringed by columns carved with scenes of ancient battles. The entire court assembled to witness, vampires filling the space with their unnatural stillness and burning eyes. Helena had dressed Lyra in black, a gown that felt like armor despite being made of silk. The king's colors, she explained. Everyone should know where your loyalty lies. Lyra was given a place near the front, flanked by Caspian on one side and Helena on the other. Across the courtyard, Nikolai stood with his supporters, radiating confidence. Dorian entered last, and the crowd parted for him like a wave. He wore no shirt, only black trousers and boots, and Lyra could see the play of muscle under his pale skin, the evidence of strength that went beyond the physical. He looked every inch the predator, the ancient king, the creature of myth. His eyes found Lyra's across the space, and she saw him center himself, drawing strength from her presence. A vampire Lyra did not know stepped into the center of the courtyard, raising their hands for silence. By the laws of our kind, Nikolai Thorne has issued challenge to Dorian Morrígan, questioning the granting of belonging to the human Lyra Jenkins. The challenge has been accepted. Terms are death or submission. The combat begins when both parties are ready. Dorian stepped into the center of the courtyard. Nikolai joined him, and they circled each other like wolves. Last chance to reconsider, Nikolai said. Admit you acted rashly, revoke her belonging, and I will withdraw the challenge. No. Then you will die for a human. How fitting. They moved. Lyra had seen vampires move before, but this was different. This was violence elevated to art, speed and strength beyond mortal comprehension. They collided with a sound like thunder, breaking apart and coming together again in a blur of motion too fast to follow. Nikolai drew first blood, claws raking across Dorian's ribs. But Dorian retaliated immediately, a strike that sent Nikolai crashing into a column hard enough to crack the stone. They fought with bare hands and fangs, and Lyra watched with her heart in her throat as wounds opened and healed, as they traded blows that would have killed a human instantly. Dorian was stronger, she could see that, but Nikolai was faster, using his speed to dart in and out, wearing Dorian down. The king is holding back, Caspian murmured beside her. He does not want to lose control. What happens if he does? We see why he has held power for 3 centuries. The fight escalated. Nikolai managed to get behind Dorian, wrapping an arm around his throat in a chokehold that would have been deadly if either of them needed to breathe. But Dorian simply reached back, grabbed Nikolai's head, and flipped him over his shoulder with enough force to drive the other vampire into the ground. Nikolai rolled away, coming up in a crouch, and for the first time Lyra saw uncertainty in his expression. "You care for her that much? Enough to actually fight?" "Yes." Dorian's voice was steady, despite the blood streaming from half a dozen wounds. "I care for her that much. Then let me show you how that care will be used against you." Nikolai moved, but not toward Dorian, toward Lyra. It happened too fast. One moment Nikolai was across the courtyard, the next he was in front of her, his hand closing around her throat, lifting her off her feet. Lyra clawed at his wrist, gasping for air that would not come. "Submit," Nikolai called to Dorian, "or I snap her neck." The entire court went silent. Dorian stood frozen in the center of the courtyard, and Lyra saw the war in his expression. The king who could not show weakness, the vampire who had to maintain control, the man who could not bear to watch her die. "This is not permitted," Caspian said, his voice hard. "The challenge was between you and the king. Harming the human is outside the bounds. I am doing nothing to harm her. I am simply holding her. If Dorian submits, I will release her unharmed. If he does not—" Nikolai's fingers tightened fractionally, and Lyra's vision started to gray at the edges. "Well, he will have made his choice." Lyra tried to speak to tell Dorian not to submit, but no air would come. She saw him take a step forward, saw the moment he decided to surrender. And then Caspian moved. He was across the space in a heartbeat, wrenching Nikolai's arm away from Lyra's throat with enough force to dislocate it. Lyra fell, gasping, and Helena caught her before she could hit the ground. "You dare!" Nikolai started, but Caspian cut him off. "You have violated the terms of combat by involving a non-combatant. The challenge is forfeit. The king wins by default. The king wins by submission." Nikolai's fury was palpable. He was about to yield. "Was I?" Dorian's voice cut through the argument like a blade. He was suddenly there, standing over Nikolai with an expression that made even the watching vampires step back. "I do not recall submitting. You were going to— What I was going to do is irrelevant. What I am going to do is end this. You broke the terms. You threatened what is mine. For that, there is only one response." Dorian's hand shot out, impossibly fast, impossibly strong. His fingers closed around Nikolai's throat, and he lifted the other vampire as easily as Nikolai had lifted Lyra. "I am Dorian Morrígan, king of the Northern Court, and I have ruled for 347 years. I have faced challenges from vampires far stronger and far more cunning than you. I have survived wars and plagues and the slow grind of centuries. And you thought to threaten me by going after a human under my protection?" Dorian's voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You have made a grave mistake. The right of contest," Nikolai choked out, "protects you within the bounds of combat. You stepped outside those bounds. Now you face my judgment as king, not as combatant." Dorian looked to the assembled court. "Let this be a lesson to any who would question my decisions. I am not a king who explains himself. I am not a king who tolerates threats to what is mine. And I am not a king who shows mercy to those who would harm the innocent to make a point." His hand closed, and Nikolai's eyes went wide with terror. "Dorian, stop." Lyra's voice was hoarse, but it carried in the silent courtyard. Dorian froze. "Lyra, do not kill him for me, please. He threatened you. And he failed. You won. Killing him now is just vengeance, and you are better than that." Lyra forced herself to stand, pushing away Helena's supporting hand. "You told me you were tired of being a monster, so do not be one. Not for this." Dorian held Nikolai for a long moment, and Lyra could see the struggle in his expression, the ancient rage, the protective fury, the simple desire to destroy the threat. Then he opened his hand. Nikolai collapsed to the ground, gasping. Dorian stepped over him without a glance, moving to Lyra. His hands were gentle as he examined her throat. where bruises were already forming. "Are you all right?" "I will be." Lyra managed a smile. "You won. Because of Caspian. Because you were willing to submit rather than watch me die. That takes more strength than winning through violence." Dorian pulled her into his arms, and Lyra felt him shake with the aftermath of adrenaline or fury or fear. Around them, the court watched in silence, bearing witness. "Let it be known," Dorian said, his voice carrying, "that Lyra Jenkins belongs to House Morrígan by my will and my protection. Any who question this again will answer to me directly. Any who threaten her will face execution. She is mine, and I am hers, and that is the end of the matter." He swept out of the courtyard, carrying Lyra with him, and the court parted like water. In his private chambers, Dorian set Lyra down gently on a couch and knelt before her, examining the bruises on her throat with shaking hands. "I should have killed him." "No, you should have done exactly what you did. He hurt you. And you stopped him." "Dorian, look at me." Lyra waited until those crimson eyes met hers. "You showed mercy. You let me influence your decision. You proved that being king does not mean being a tyrant. Do you understand how important that is?" "I understand that I came within seconds of losing you, and the thought is unbearable." Dorian's hands cupped her face with infinite care. "When he grabbed you, I felt 3 centuries of control shatter. I would have done anything, surrendered everything, just to see you safe. I know. And that is why you won. Not through strength or power, but through caring more about my life than your pride." Lyra leaned into his touch. "You told the court that I am yours and you are mine. Did you mean it?" "Every word." "Then I have a question. What does it mean to belong to each other?" Dorian was quiet for a moment, considering. "It means I protect you, and you ground me. It means I rule this court, but you rule my heart. It means we are bound together, not by law or tradition, but by choice, your choice and mine." He paused. "It means I am yours, Lyra, as completely as you are mine, not as possession, but as partner, as someone who belongs with me, not to me." Lyra felt tears burn her eyes, but these were good tears, the kind that came with relief and joy. "That is what I needed to hear. I love you." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "I do not know when it happened. Perhaps the moment you first challenged me. Perhaps when you looked at me in that courtyard and asked me not to become a monster. But I love you, and I will spend however long you give me proving that love is real." "I love you too." Lyra pulled him up onto the couch beside her. "And we need to talk about the whole mortality thing, because I am not ready to become a vampire, but I am also not ready to give you up. We have time, decades if you are lucky." Dorian wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and Lyra nestled into his side. "We will figure it out. Together." "Together," Lyra agreed. "That has a nice sound to it." They sat in silence for a while, the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by the simple comfort of being close. Finally, Dorian spoke again. "You said in the courtyard that I was better than vengeance. I am not certain that is true." "It is. I have seen it. You see what you want to see. I see what is there." Lyra lifted her head to look at him. "You are a king, and you are a vampire, and you have done things in 300 years that I probably do not want to know about. But you are also kind, and lonely, and trying to be better than what you were made to be. That is what I see." Dorian kissed her forehead. "You are going to ruin me, Lyra Jenkins." "Good. You probably need a little ruining." The next weeks were a strange sort of paradise. The court settled into the new reality of their king having a human partner, and while there were still whispers, no one dared challenge it openly after what had happened to Nikolai. Lyra found her place in the world Dorian had built. She worked with Helena to improve conditions for the human staff, arguing with Dorian late into the night about fair wages and reasonable hours until he threw up his hands and agreed to reforms that made him deeply uncomfortable but ultimately more just. She studied vampire law and history, not because she wanted to become one of them, but because she wanted to understand the world her partner ruled. Dorian taught her himself, their lessons often derailing into arguments about ethics and philosophy that left them both frustrated and exhilarated. And she loved him, learning the shape of his loneliness, the weight of his responsibilities, the way 3 centuries of being king had carved channels in his personality that ran deep and true. She loved the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as though her words mattered more than anything else in his ancient world. She loved the way he was trying to change, to become someone who could partner rather than simply rule. 2 months after the combat with Nikolai, Dorian came to Lyra's room in the middle of the day, which was unusual. Vampires could move during daylight within the spelled walls of the court, but they rarely chose to. "I have been thinking," he said without preamble. "Always dangerous." Lyra set aside the book she had been reading. "About what?" "About belonging. About what you said that first night, that it has to go both ways." Dorian crossed to where she sat, curled in a chair by the window. "I told the court you were mine, but I did not give you anything in return. No symbol, no gesture, nothing to show that I belong to you as well. I do not need a symbol. I have your word. You deserve more than words." Dorian knelt before her chair, and the sight of a vampire king on his knees sent a jolt through Lyra's chest. In the human world, there is a tradition when 2 people wish to bind themselves together. I know you are not ready for turning. I know the future is uncertain. But I would ask you, Lyra Jenkins, if you would consent to marry me. Lyra's breath caught. Marry you? By human custom, before human law. A partnership recognized not just by my court but by your world as well. So that everyone, human and vampire, knows you are mine and I am yours. Dorian reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside was a ring, silver worked with symbols Lyra recognized from her studies as ancient wards of protection. "I am asking you to belong with me, Lyra, not just in my world but in both of them. Will you marry me?" Lyra felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Yes. Of course, yes." Dorian slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, cool against her skin. Then he was standing, pulling her up into his arms, and Lyra wrapped herself around him, laughing and crying at once. "I love you," she said against his shoulder, "my ridiculous, impossible vampire king." "I love you," he replied, "my infuriating, perfect human." They married a month later in a ceremony that blended vampire tradition and human custom in ways that confused both groups thoroughly. Lyra wore white, Dorian wore black, and Caspian served as witness with an expression that suggested he was not entirely certain how his king had ended up here, but was cautiously pleased about it. The vows they wrote themselves, speaking promises before the assembled court, and a handful of human friends Lyra had made among the staff. "I promise to belong with you," Lyra said, her hands clasped in Dorian's. "To challenge you, to support you, to remind you that being powerful does not mean being alone. I promise to see you always, not as monster or king, but as the person you are and the person you are becoming." "I promise to belong with you," Dorian echoed. "To listen when you speak, to change when you show me I am wrong, to protect you without imprisoning you. I promise to see you always, not as possession or prize, but as my partner and my equal in all the ways that matter." They sealed the promises with a kiss, and the court erupted in a strange blend of vampire stillness and human cheering. Later, in the privacy of their shared chambers, Lyra had moved into Dorian's rooms a week after his proposal. They lay tangled together in the enormous bed, and Dorian traced the ring on Lyra's finger with gentle reverence. "I never thought I would marry," he admitted. "Not after I turned. It seemed like a human thing, irrelevant to what I had become. And now? Now I understand that the best parts of being human are not actually about mortality. They are about connection, about choosing to bind yourself to someone else despite all the risks." Dorian kissed her knuckles. "You have taught me that, Lyra. You have taught me a few things too, like how to argue effectively with someone who has 300 years of experience winning debates. You win plenty of our arguments. Only because you let me. No, because you are right." Dorian pulled her closer. More often than is strictly comfortable for my ego. You are right. Lyra laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. We are a strange pair. The strangest, Dorian agreed, and I would not have it any other way. Months turned into years, and Lyra settled into her role as the Vampire King's consort with a grace that surprised even her. She became a fixture in the court, known for her advocacy for the human staff and her willingness to challenge Dorian's decrees when she thought them unjust. The question of her mortality hung over them always, a shadow they both acknowledged but did not dwell on. Dorian made it clear he would turn her if she asked, but only if she asked, only if she was certain. Lyra, for her part, was not yet ready to give up the sun, the warmth of daylight, the possibility of children she might never have, but was not ready to surrender. So they existed in the space between mortal and immortal, making the most of the time they had. On their 3rd anniversary, Lyra brought Dorian an idea she had been developing for months. I want to open a sanctuary, she said over dinner in their chambers, a place for humans who have nowhere else to go, like I did when I found you. Dorian set down his glass, considering. That would be a significant undertaking. I know. But you offered me belonging when I needed it most. What if we made that available to others? Not vampire belonging necessarily, but a place where people could find safety, help getting back on their feet, a community. Lyra leaned forward, warming to her subject. We have the resources. We have the space in the court that goes unused. We could do this. We would need staff, oversight, security to ensure that those we help do not discover what we are and spread panic. But Dorian was smiling as he listed the obstacles. You have thought this through. I have thought of little else for 6 months. Then we will do it. Dorian reached across the table to take her hand. I will have Caspian draw up plans. We can convert the East Wing, expand if needed. You will oversee it? With Helena's help, yes. Then consider it done. Dorian brought her hand to his lips. You are going to change this court whether I am ready for it or not. You knew what you were getting when you asked me to belong to you. I did, and I would not change a moment of it. The sanctuary opened a year later, a wing of the court dedicated to providing shelter and support for humans in crisis. Lyra ran it with quiet efficiency, and word spread slowly through channels that existed just outside normal society. People came who had nowhere else to turn, and they found safety within vampire walls, though most never knew the true nature of their benefactors. Dorian watched his wife work with a mixture of pride and awe. She had taken his court, his carefully controlled world, and infused it with purpose beyond simply existing. She had reminded him why power mattered, what it could be used for beyond maintaining itself. On the sanctuary's 1st anniversary, they stood together in the main hall, watching as staff helped a young mother and her 2 children settle into their temporary quarters. Do you ever regret it? Dorian asked quietly. Binding yourself to me? You could have had a normal life. Lyra leaned into his side. I never wanted a normal life. I wanted a meaningful one. And this, what we have built together, is more meaningful than anything I could have imagined. You have given me purpose. You know that, do you not? We have given each other purpose. That is what belonging with someone means. They stood in comfortable silence, and Dorian thought about the woman who had climbed his steps in the rain 5 years ago, desperate and defiant. He thought about the impulse that had made him offer her belonging, the words that had surprised even him. He thought about how she had challenged every assumption he held, had demanded he see her as equal, had transformed what could have been possession into true partnership. I am glad you climbed those steps, he said finally. So am I. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes warm with love and shared history. Though I am still working on the whole vampire thing. Fair warning, I might have strong opinions about your blood-sourcing practices in the next council meeting. Dorian groaned. You are going to be the death of me. Technically impossible. You are already dead. A technicality you exploit ruthlessly. Lyra laughed, and the sound echoed through the hall like a promise. A promise that despite immortality and mortality, despite the impossible differences between them, They had found something real and worth fighting for. Belonging, it turned out, was not about ownership or control. It was about choosing each other again and again in the face of every obstacle. It was about building something together that neither could create alone. It was about finding home in another person, regardless of how impossible that should be. Years continued to pass, and Lyra approached her 30th birthday with the awareness that time was becoming a more pressing concern. She still looked young, but she could see the subtle changes, the first hints that mortality was a clock running down. Dorian never mentioned it, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart ache. He was afraid, she realized, afraid of losing her, afraid of facing the centuries ahead alone again. On the night of her 30th birthday, after the celebration with the court and the staff, Lyra brought Dorian to the sanctuary's roof garden, a place they often came to talk when they needed privacy and perspective. "I have been thinking about turning," she said without preamble. Dorian went very still. "Have you?" "I am not ready yet, but I am starting to be ready to think about being ready." Lyra took his hand. "I need you to understand something, though. If I choose this, it has to be for me, not for you, not to save our relationship, not because I am afraid of dying. It has to be because I want the life you live, because I am willing to give up the sun for the other things turning would give me." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because you cannot pressure me, Dorian, even subtly, even with those looks you give me when you think I am not paying attention. This has to be entirely my choice, or I will come to resent it, and then I will come to resent you." "You are right." Dorian squeezed her hand. "And I swear to you, I will not pressure you. If you choose mortality, if you want to live out your natural span, I will cherish every moment we have. And when you are gone, I will carry what you have taught me forward. It will hurt, but I will survive it. Vampires are very good at surviving. And if I choose turning, then I will have you with me for as long as we both exist, and I will spend every night being grateful for the gift." Dorian pulled her into his arms. "But Lyra, my love, you need to understand what you would be giving up. We have spoken of it before, but truly think about it. No more sunlight, no more aging, no children of your body. The slow erosion of your humanity over decades and centuries. These are not small prices. I know, and I am not ready to pay them yet." Lyra rested her head against his chest, listening to the heartbeat he maintained through will rather than need. "But I am starting to imagine a future where I might be, and I wanted you to know that. Thank you for telling me." They stood together under the stars, and Lyra thought about futures. The one where she grew old and died, leaving Dorian alone. The one where she turned and walked beside him through centuries. Neither was perfect. Both held loss and gain in measures impossible to weigh, but she had time to decide. Not infinite time, but enough. 3 more years passed. Lyra was 33, and she had finally reached a point of certainty. She chose a night when the court was quiet, when Dorian had no pressing business, when they could take the time the conversation deserved. She found him in his study, reviewing contracts with the focused intensity he brought to all his work. "I want to turn." Dorian's head snapped up. "What?" "I want to become a vampire. I have thought about it, weighed it, imagined both futures, and I choose the one where we face the centuries together." Lyra moved to sit across from him. "I am ready to give up the sun. I am ready to accept that I will never have children. I am ready to become what you are. But I have conditions." "Name them." "I want to finish the work I started with the sanctuary first. There are programs I want to establish, systems I want to make sure are self-sustaining. That will take another year, maybe 2. Done. What else? I want to see my human friends one last time. Say goodbye properly without telling them what I am doing. They deserve that." "Of course. And I want your promise that you will be patient with me when I am newly turned. I will not be myself for a while, from what I have read. I will be more vampire than person. Promise me you will help me find my way back to who I am." Dorian came around the desk to kneel before her chair. I promise, on my life, my crown, everything I am, I will help you navigate turning. I will be patient. I will remind you who you are until you can remember yourself. Then I am ready. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. Dorian pulled her into a kiss that tasted of relief and joy, and the particular sweetness of prayers answered. I love you, and I will make certain you never regret this choice. I know. Lyra smiled against his lips. Because we are in this together. That is what belonging means. The preparations took 18 months. Lyra finished her work with the sanctuary, training her replacement and establishing endowments to fund the program in perpetuity. She said careful goodbyes to the human friends she had made, giving them gifts and memories without revealing the truth of what was coming. And she studied everything she could find about turning, about the process, about what she would become. Dorian answered her questions with patient thoroughness, hiding nothing, even the parts that frightened her. Finally, on a cool autumn night, 2 weeks before her 35th birthday, Lyra stood in the chambers she shared with Dorian and said, I am ready. Are you certain? There is no urgency. We can wait longer if you need. I am certain. The process was less romantic than literature suggested. Dorian drank from her neck, his bite sharp, but not painful, and Lyra felt her life drain away with a strange sense of peace. When she was on the edge of death, he cut his own wrist and held it to her lips. Drink, he commanded, his voice tight with strain. Drink, and come back to me. The blood was sweet and terrible, and Lyra swallowed convulsively, feeling it burn through her veins like fire. The pain was immense, cellular, a complete rewriting of what she was. She screamed, and Dorian held her through it, murmuring promises and reassurances she could not quite hear over the roar in her ears. Then darkness took her, and she fell into a death that was not quite final. She woke 3 days later. The world was different. Colors too bright, sounds too sharp, her body thrumming with power that felt like lightning under her skin. And the hunger. God, the hunger was an abyss that demanded to be filled. Dorian was there, as he had been for all 3 days, waiting. Lyra, look at me. She turned toward him, and some distant part of her brain cataloged the changes. His heartbeat, impossibly loud, the rush of blood under his skin, the scent of him, rich and complex and utterly distracting. I need... Her voice was different, layered with harmonics that had not existed before. I know. Here. He handed her a glass of blood, and she drank it down without thought, the hunger receding slightly. The first weeks were a blur. Lyra existed in a haze of instinct and hunger, driven by needs she barely understood. But Dorian was patient, exactly as he had promised. He taught her to control the bloodlust, to navigate the enhanced senses, to move with her new speed and strength without destroying everything she touched, and slowly, piece by piece, she found herself again. Not the human Lyra Jenkins, but someone new, someone stronger, faster, with power singing in her veins and eternity stretching ahead. 2 months after her turning, she finally felt like herself enough to have a real conversation. How do you feel? Dorian asked, watching her with the careful attention he had maintained since the moment she woke. Strange, powerful, different. Lyra examined her hands, pale as bone now, foreign and familiar at once. But still me, somehow. I was afraid I would lose myself completely. You did, for a while. But you fought your way back. I am proud of you. Is it always this hard? For the first year, yes. Then it becomes easier. You learn to control the hunger, to remember your humanity even as you leave it behind. Dorian took her hand. And you have something most newly turned vampires do not have. You have a partner who loves you, who will help you navigate this. You are not alone in the dark. No. Lyra squeezed his hand, marveling at the strength in her grip. I am not. The next years were a process of becoming. Lyra learned to exist as a vampire, to move through the night with grace and power, to drink blood without guilt. But she also fought to maintain the parts of herself that mattered: the compassion, the drive to help others, the belief that immortality meant responsibility rather than simply indulgence. She continued to run the sanctuary, though now she had to be careful never to appear during the day, to hide her changed nature from the humans she served. It was harder, but not impossible. And Dorian supported her, providing resources and protection and quiet pride in what she had built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the roof garden and looked out over the city that had no idea vampires walked among them. "Do you regret it?" Dorian asked. "Turning?" "Some days I miss the sun," Lyra admitted. "I miss the warmth. I miss being able to see a sunrise without it feeling like a memory of something lost. But I do not regret the choice. This life, with you, is worth what I gave up. I will spend the rest of our existence trying to make certain of that." "You do not have to try. You already have." Lyra leaned into him. "We have built something here, Dorian. Not just the sanctuary, but a partnership that works. A love that survived impossible odds. A proof that belonging can go both ways, even when one person is mortal and the other is a vampire king. You are no longer mortal. No, now I am your vampire queen. Though I notice you have never actually crowned me." Dorian laughed. "Would you like a crown? I can arrange one. I want the reality more than the symbol. I want to rule beside you, make decisions with you, shape this court into something that reflects both of us. You already do that. Then make it official. Co-rulers, equal partners in all things." Dorian turned to face her fully. "You are serious." "Completely. You have been king alone for 300 years. What if you did not have to be alone anymore? What if we did this together?" The court would need to acknowledge it. There would be challenges, questions about whether a vampire so young should have such power. Let them question. We have faced challenges before. We will face them again. Lyra met his eyes, crimson to crimson now. "I am asking you to share your crown, Dorian, to make me your queen in truth, not just in name. Will you?" Dorian studied her for a long moment, and Lyra saw him weigh the risks, the potential problems, the massive change it would represent. Then he smiled, and it was bright and genuine and full of love. "Yes, let us rule together, you and I. Let us show the court what partnership truly means." The coronation took place a month later, a ceremony steeped in vampire tradition and witnessed by the entire court. Lyra knelt before Dorian as a subject, and he placed a crown of silver on her head, speaking the ancient words that granted her authority equal to his own. Then she stood, and he knelt before her, and she repeated the gesture, crowning him as he had crowned her. A recognition that they were bound together not by hierarchy but by choice, by love, by the mutual decision to belong with rather than to. The court erupted in acknowledgement. And if there were those who questioned the wisdom of sharing power with a vampire barely 5 years turned, they kept their concerns silent. Lyra and Dorian ruled together for the next 50 years, transforming the Northern Court into something new. They opened the sanctuary program to other courts, spreading the model across the vampire world. They reformed laws to protect human staff better, to ensure that belonging could never be used as a tool of abuse. They built bridges between vampire and human societies in the shadows, finding ways for both to coexist more peacefully. And they loved each other, through arguments and agreements, through challenges from rivals and celebrations of victories. They proved that belonging could be mutual, that power could be shared, that even creatures made for solitude could find true partnership. One night, 73 years after Lyra climbed those rain-slick steps, she and Dorian stood in the entrance hall where they had first met. The court had expanded over the decades, sprawling into adjacent buildings, creating a network of safety and community that reached far beyond what either had imagined possible. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Dorian asked, his arm around her waist. "I said I had nowhere left to belong. And I said belong to me." I have thought about those words often over the years, how arrogant they were, how possessive, how kind, Lyra corrected, how generous, how desperately needed. I did not understand what I was offering. I thought I was giving you shelter. Instead, you gave me purpose, you gave me partnership, you gave me love. Dorian turned her to face him. You gave me belonging, Lyra. True belonging, the kind that goes both ways, and I am grateful for it every night of our existence. We gave it to each other, Lyra said. That is what makes it work. They kissed there in the entrance hall, two vampires who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a court, and a love that proved even immortal kings could learn to belong. And in the rooms above, the sanctuary continued its work, taking in those with nowhere else to go, offering them what Lyra and Dorian had found in each other. A place to belong, a home to call their own, a future worth fighting for, together.